This is the Tree of Life, Season 11, Chapter 6. In this episode, we will be elaborating the migration of dissonant spaces, linearly and laterally. To start off, in past episodes, we talked about how appropriation represents the migration of a dissonant space laterally, that is from one person to another. In this episode, I would like to discuss how linear migration of dissonant spaces occurs. The process by which a dissonant consensuality results in the formation of a hybrid structure is through sublimating language produced at the conclusion of a substitution event, which, through that hybrid structure, causes displacement of the convoluted path into path parsimony coinciding with a retrocausal event. This sublimating language causes dissonance between the projected expectations of the conjoined consensuality and the projections created by the sublimating language regarding the action of that actor, which must be ameliorated in some fashion. This typically occurs at the conclusion of the correction time, namely, through the attribution of an impulse dialectical to the negated impulse, which created the dissonant space in the first place. This point in time is associated with the resumption of mirroring through the reorienting of the word associations of the sublimating language according to the dialectical impulse to the originating negated impulse. Now, this doesn't end the process. For even after the conclusion of the correction time, there may still be some residual dissonance between the sublimating language and the expectations of the conjoined consensuality. This residual dissonance is what leads to the migration of the dissonant space linearly as opposed to laterally. But this also reveals the underlying nature of appropriation as a form of displacement mirroring. For to fully eliminate the dissonance between the expectations of the conjoined consensuality and the sublimating language requires appropriation after the resumption of time parsimony, or the correction time. In other words, there are two separate stages to the process by which dissonant spaces are eliminated through lateral migration, or appropriation. The first is the input stage or the sabotage stage, which occurs at the beginning of the correction time, before the resumption of time parsimony. At this stage, the originating sublimating language must be altered, such that the continuity of the language is undermined directly. This serves to decrease the penetration of that sublimating language within the conjoined consensuality, and reduce the scale of the dissonance created between the sublimating language and the expectations of the conjoined consensuality. The second stage, the output stage, or the cleanup stage, wherein that dissonance is eliminated by displacement mirroring or appropriation, after the correction time. What is meant by displacement mirroring? This describes the manner by which one actor is substituted for another whilst mirroring the same underlying behavior which preserved the dissonant space, as between the first occurrence and the second occurrence. Somewhere between these two stages is the resumption of time parsimony, represented by the reorientation of the impulses of the actor to be dialectical to the originating negated impulse, which originated the dissonant consensuality. But there are things that can be done to undermine the displacement mirroring step in the process, namely through the techniques explored in the podcast Glitching Techniques, which are spatial ways of creating dissonance between the expectations of the conjoined consensuality and the actor's verbalizations. Now, it is important to also note that the sabotage stage, that is, by impairing the continuity of the sublimating language as it dissolves into the conjoined consensuality, creates a single association between the sublimating language and the dialectical impulse to the originating negated impulse. But this single association is external rather than internal, and it must be further cleaned up by imposing that dialectical impulse upon the actor who negated the originating impulse. This occurs within the second stage, during the cleanup stage. That's the end of the podcast for today.